Hi, it's Dawn from Dawn's Dirt. Dirt can mean queen, dirt can mean animals, dirt can mean politics, dirt can mean religion, and today dirt means morning sickness. So I'm here with Jessica. Welcome here, Jessica. And can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Dawn. Thanks so much for having me on today. I am a mixed bag of tricks. I am working online as a health coach, helping pregnant moms or moms to be reverse or prevent severe forms of morning sickness. I'm also a clinically practicing physiotherapist, so I've got a little bit of everything kind of happening. So yeah.
Hey, I love it. So you're an online coach. That's what you're doing is you talk to mamas who have morning sickness and reach out to them. And yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I think a little backstory before how I got into that was that I was somebody who unfortunately had a lot of autoimmune issues. Probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, I went to the medical system many times and I was kind of like, am I allergic to something? Is this happening? Is that? I got bumped around to at least a dozen specialists and they really couldn't find anything. And they're like, well, you're young, you're skinny. It's like, you're probably fine. You're probably healthy. Come back if it gets worse. They just weren't really kind of seeing what it was I wanted to do. So I ended up taking a nutritional therapy diploma and specializing in epigenetics. And I learned about how food can turn on or off gene expression and therefore your chances of getting a certain disease and pathology. So I used that information. I was able to reverse my autoimmune disease. Fast forward a few years, I get pregnant. I end up getting a condition called hyperemesis gravidarum, and this is a severe form of morning sickness. This happens where women are losing 5, 10, 20% of their body weight because they're being sick so often. For me, a bad day was throwing up 30 times a day, needing to be hospitalized, having IVs, just really couldn't keep anything down. And I ended up sort of having this mentality of if I could do it once, I can do it again in terms of figuring out this problem for myself. And I had little tips and tricks and nuggets of information that I sort of went off of. And, if a medication was working, what was it doing in my body? What was the process and things like that? So I tried to recreate that through nutrition and lifestyle and just sort of reverse engineer the process. I went from being sick 30 times a day to never being sick again in my pregnancy within 3 days. And now I have just been helping women around the world do the same thing because I know we all kind of know what morning sickness is, but we don't know the extent that it can go to. 1 in 3 babies are lost to hyperemesis gravidarum when a woman experiences it. 50% of those are women. Think about terminating even a wanted pregnancy because they are so sick. And if they have other kids or, other things, they just really can't. There was days where I could not put a sip of water towards my mouth without projectile vomiting afterwards. And so, when that happens 30 times in a day and you don't even get a little bit of water in, that is impacting the nutrition and the space for your baby to grow. And so that's a little bit about how I got here.
Wow, man, I couldn't even imagine being that sick. Like I've had 3 babies, then yeah, I got a little bit sick. I'll tell you a quick little story. I went on a cruise. This is the sickest I've ever been on any of my pregnancies. I went on a cruise when I was pregnant with my second baby. And yeah, I would go to dinner at night and I'd eat the appetizer and go to the bathroom and then eat the main course and go to the bathroom and then eat the dessert and go to the bathroom. And that's probably the sickest I've ever been being pregnant. But yeah, I couldn't even imagine not even being able to drink water. Like that's insane. And so there's women out there that suffer from this that, just can't keep anything down. That's wild. And so, yeah, I'm so glad to have you on here to educate us about this and how to do that. Are you ready to take control of your food freedom and become ungovernable? Do you remember toilet paper wars in 2020? Do you have a plan? If your finances get so tight and you're having to choose between paying your rent or your mortgage and food for your family, have you bought land recently and you just don't even know where to start and you want to grow vegetables for yourself and your community? I'm Dawn and I'm a food freedom coach. I can teach you the skills to live and eat like grandma did, from growing a garden to raising animals and having meat for your table. No matter the size of space you have, big or small, planning for year-round survival, including canning and preserving and sourdough and cooking from scratch and just planning ahead. A larger homestead or space and you just want to make some side income from the space you have. I care so much about people walking with them step by step to become ungovernable, self-reliant, and able to feed themselves. I was a vegetable farmer and I fed up to 100,000 people per year. I've had chickens, meat chickens, cows, sheep, and pigs. I know what it takes to cook from scratch and live like grandma did, and just being thrifty in the way you do your food system. If you want to save money and take your food freedom into your own hands, let's book a free jumpstart call with me and we can work together to learn how. If you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. It's estimated that it says 1% to 3% of pregnancies are affected by this. I think it's closer to 10%, and it's just growing because our food quality's gone down, our nutrition quality's going down, the toxicities that we're surrounded by are only increasing, and we just don't understand, the importance of all those things kind of leading up to and preparing our bodies for pregnancy.
That's so true. So I don't know if you knew this or not, but I was actually a farmer for many, many years. I grew vegetables for lots of people. And I've had mamas coming to me with their children, and their children would eat my vegetables and not other people's vegetables. And I had people who would say, "Oh, I don't like tomatoes." But then I'm like, "Have you really had a tomato?" And they'd try my tomatoes and they'd like them. And so my produce was totally different and nutrient dense because it was so fresh. Produce loses nutrients the longer it's been off of a plant. And so my produce was so fresh that it was so full of nutrients. And so yeah. How does our food, meat, all the things, dairy, all of it, how does it affect pregnancy?
Yeah, so I think how it's impacting us now is that we are really seeing a loss of the quality of food, like you said, right? Nutrients are lost the longer that plant is detached from the soil and the earth, and the soil quality's gone down a lot too, which I know that you probably talk about lots on here. So minerals and the things that would be, infusing that food with nutrients is going down. And we are not taught about the cost or the symptoms of these nutrient deficiencies. So really some simple ones, high blood pressure can be just a nutrient deficiency, nausea, vomiting, headaches. Like there are so many things that are common ailments that are medicated and profited off of that are simply the signs of a deficiency of a nutrient. And we've just never been taught that. I always like to bring this up to people like, how much manganese do you need in a day? How much potassium do you need in a day? Do you ever see, molybdenum put on an ingredient label, but it's an essential mineral that you need to have every day? And so I think by design, there is this whole lost conversation around minerals when it comes to food quality and food density. And the cost of that is that we're bearing this burden that we think is like normal, quote unquote, maybe some digestive distress, maybe a bit of constipation, headaches, worsening vision or different things. And these are all, the body saying like, hey, I don't have enough of that. And then we get to pregnancy. And depending on how sensitive you are, how, readily your body wants to talk to you, you get really big. I'm shouting at you at this point, right? And so even just some things like potassium, B6, magnesium, all three of those, deficiency sign is nausea. So why don't we just try those as a starting point, when we are feeling sick or we have routine morning sickness, or if we want to sort of prevent that, let's really look at a comprehensive way of going about our food. Obviously, that the meat system and everything is also sort of broken in that. And so we're just seeing that one of I chalk this up to deficiencies, toxicities, and imbalances. And honestly, I would say a lot of autoimmune disease fall into that category. A lot of cancers fall into that category. And so 1/3 of that pillar really being like nutrition as the foundation and our body and our cells just not having the raw resources they need to function off.
For sure. Absolutely. And when I think of food too, I think of what are you actually putting in your body? Are you putting in meat? I grew up on a farm and, growing vegetables and things like that. And we had meat from either our place or my grandparents' place. We drank raw dairy. We just ate from the farm. We were farm to table. And yeah, I'm just seeing now that we're eating in the center aisles of a grocery store. And I think where the bigger problem is with our food is not necessarily the milk and vegetables and things like that, although I think it's so processed too, but it's the steps between the farm. It's not the farm, it's the steps between the farm to get our food back. And what have they done to it? And if you're feeding your body craft dinner and, things from the center aisle or McDonald's or those things, there's not the nutrients in there that you need to function. And so your body's just getting filler like sawdust or, whatever. It's not even nutrients in food. It's just
Yeah.
cardboard. Like, yeah. And so when you're like back in the day, this is a question for you. Back in the day, do you think back 100 years ago, women struggled quite as much? Or what's your thoughts on that? Like, because they ate very differently back then than we eat today. So what's your thought process around that?
So I would say probably on the whole, no. I think it was probably easier. They wouldn't have probably had numbers and numbers of kids if they were absolutely debilitated, throwing up, just nauseous the entire experience. So I think food quality, mineral quality, all of those pieces were better. And a lot of these things really are a perfect storm, right? Like cancers, autoimmune disease, this experience of HG, it is the perfect storm of a combination. So we've had nutrient quality going down kind of steadily at the same time as toxicity going up through processing, through chemicals, through agricultural practices, just in our skincare and our everything we use, right? There's just this influx now that the body has less resources and more to do in terms of detoxing. And so there might have been women who had morning sickness, but do I think it's at that, that 10% that I'm estimating pregnancies are at now? No, it was probably a percent or a percent, and it was potentially more manageable. And for the ones it wasn't, maybe there's a piece of trauma or organ function or different things. So, there's a lot of factors that I look at when I'm helping these women. Yes, it's nutrition. Yes, it's toxicities, but it's also like energetics and different things. So like, I say this not to be like in a victim mentality or like, woe is me, but I do wonder if like sort of now we're one of the most traumatized generations in a sense of like grandparents, great-grandparents were at war. Parents to grandparents were like diminished from having any emotions because why are you crying? I went to war. Like, don't cry over this. So everything was like inward, right? And so that affects the organ systems that also are now contending with these toxins and nutrient deficiencies and things. And then that's the blueprint for sort of our generation and for now our kids. So every generation, there's sort of like a down regulation of some of these things based on emotions, traumas, chemicals, nutrients, the whole gamut of things that I'm talking about. And we're just sort of seeing that kids are getting sicker. We're getting sicker. We're not trending in the right direction with any of this. Yeah, I think they probably had it better off back when they were a lot more community-based, farm-based local.
Absolutely. You're right that food has changed. So I think of milk. I'm going to share a little story. I know of an individual who could not have dairy. They could not have dairy at all. It would just come out not the way you're talking, but the other way. And this person could not have a stitch of dairy. So they cut out dairy completely. And then they got their hands on some raw dairy, unpasteurized dairy, and they had a little bit of it. And next thing you know, they were totally fine. And so it's not it's the processing, right? I love how you talked about too, that we are just putting band-aids on things, that we are pushing pills. We are, because the first thing for morning sickness is, oh, here's a pill. And it's not getting to the root cause of why things are going on. And you touch too on stress. Like when I was pregnant with my second baby, my dad passed away, and that was like a traumatic, stressful situation. And yeah, if you can speak more to that it's not just food, but it's outside, it's all the influences that would affect a baby growing in a baby's tummy or in mama's tummy.
Yeah, so I think like this is the area that I would probably get the most resistance from, is that emotions and energetics are a part of this. And, there's different, I've come to this by studying traditional Chinese medicine, German new medicine, herbal medicine. I'm just sort of been a student of the body and of how it works. And I'm interested, if something has been working for a culture for 500, 1,000 years, like there's obviously something there. And so, I really took a deep dive into that. German medicine would say that any disease pathology, although it focuses around cancer, is the body's response to a traumatic or emotionally stressing event. Now, what's stressful for me versus you, it doesn't matter. It's like the perception from the person. So one person may have their dog die and it's totally fine, and someone may have like that's the most traumatic loss they've ever experienced grief is massive. A year down the line, they find a tumor in the lung, which is associated with kind of grief. So German medicine would say that the body plays out either adding tissue or taking tissue away based on the response of the body in these 5 biological laws. And so really interestingly, they've said that they've never caught cancer in transition. They've never been able to prove that cancer that starts here spreads to here. And so they're saying, when I do get a diagnosis of breast cancer and then later I have metastases in the bone, like what's happening? And they're saying, well, your body thought there was too much of something and you had a traumatic response to identifying that now I have cancer. And now it's trying to pull tissue from another way. So it's like this playing out of this thing. And so often, especially when our body is adding tissue, or adding fluid or inflammation to an area to bring cells to that area to help heal, Western medicine calls that cancer or calls that a disease and then cuts it out or medicates it or does something to interrupt that process. Traditional Chinese medicine would say that every organ system resides or governs a set of emotions. So the liver is really tied to anger, resentment, irritability, those sorts of things. The lungs are around grief, sadness. Kidneys around fear of moving forward, fear of the future. The stomach more worry and anxiety. And so when we have traumatic extreme events that, like I said, that could be you dropped your popsicle as a kid and you weren't comforted and you didn't have the skills to kind of work through that. Or that could be the loss of your father while you're pregnant, right? There is the gamut and it doesn't matter. It's just how did your body perceive that event? And do you have the skills to work through that? An emotion lasts at a peak intensity 90 seconds if we fully experience it and go through it and process it. We often don't do that. We distract ourselves. We get in conversation. We do something. We sort of like flip it from our conscious mind into our subconscious mind. And our subconscious mind actually stores that in the body as energy. Just like a computer has a hard drive that's storing the pictures you never look at off in the distance, right? And so that energy impacts an organ system. This is why acupuncture and acupressure are a thing. You're trying to free up and mobilize energy along, say, your liver meridian or your bladder meridian or whatever. So when we see that these emotions and these stressors are having physiological effects on the body and the organ systems, it's then not surprising that that means that organ system can't work as well. So, maybe you were feeling a lot of anger that your dad passed at a time when he didn't get to experience your baby coming or this or that. And now the organ that's dealing with that is your liver, partly. And now your liver is really in charge of detoxifying and going through that process. And because it's dealing with so much of the emotional stuff, it's not doing the detox as well. And so now you're accumulating toxins and you're storing toxins, right? Then you're pregnant later and that's more pronounced that you have a toxic system or that a disease comes up or different things. So it's a long-winded way to talk about it, but we do say it in every, Chinese medicine talks about it as like your life force, your chi. And yoga is like your prana. And then there's like all different ways that cultures have been talking about this energetic aspect to our physical health. And it's just Western medicine is probably intentionally slow to capture that because if we realized how much we can talk ourselves into being sick and we pivoted that towards being healthy, like that would be a really profound movement for us.
Wow. That's so much information, but so good. It would make sense too that if your liver, let's say, is under pressure from emotions, that if you're trying to pump garbage food through it as well, there's just so much capacity and it just can't do it all. And so maybe it can process the emotion part if you gave it good food, but
I always mention that about I use a cup as an example and I teach this. One of the things I say, the other thing too is your liver needs specific nutrients to go from phase 1 to phase 2 of detoxification and to protect your cells from damage because when your body has a toxin, it stores it inside a fat cell because a fat cell isn't permeable to water. So it can kind of be protected in there. The more you accumulate and hold fat, the more your body's detoxification processes have been storing that because they're not up to scratch the way they need to. And so it doesn't matter how much you exercise and eat. If you're deficient in key nutrients that your liver needs to detox, there's sort of an overflow or an excess there. When we talk about say this is the capacity of my liver, right? And if my nutrient deficiencies have really added, and this is the amount of stress, have added a lot to this, right? And so my liver can't work because it doesn't have the raw building blocks. And then you add an emotionally traumatic event, and then you add in toxins that are coming through your skin and your house, it will overflow. And it doesn't matter, if you're at this capacity, it doesn't matter if it's emotions or toxins or whatever, just a little bit more stress will overflow that system. And so I do a really unique process with my people where I say like one thing is like, do you have mom rage? Are you quick to feeling irritable? Because that's a sign that your liver's like at its max capacity, right? You can't cope with those and process those emotions because your liver's like, hey, I'm struggling. I cannot even detox because you're not feeding me the right things. And it's really this multifaceted approach. And I kind of go over that comprehensively with multiple organ systems when I'm working with my clients. And I joke that like your husband could take this course or somebody like this. The morning sickness is a symptom of the body's being out of balance, right? A dis-ease. And so when we put that back into balance, the symptom of morning sickness goes away. But that could be cancer. That could be autoimmune disease. That could be headaches or pain or whatever it is. It's like the more we understand our bodies and what each system needs, the more we can like kind of pull from every one of those areas to tip the scales.
I love it. I love that you've done the research in this and that you've made it work in your own life, and you've got clients that I'm sure are finding success in this. So as we're talking here, I did have a question, and I don't know if there's any correlation, but I'm just going to ask the question. So I shared that I was pregnant with my second baby. This was 16 years ago. I was pregnant with my second baby, and my dad suddenly passed away, which is a traumatic event. I have often wondered, and you're an expert, I've often wondered what that has done to my child. And I'll just tell you a little history. She's had some bladder issues over the years. And so how can do you think that those two things correlated with your education and your experience? I'm just so curious about that.
Yeah, it absolutely could correlate. I'm going to pull up a chart right now and see if I can kind of show you on here just a little personal example. Like my husband's mom was pregnant with him, and her husband at the time had left while she was pregnant. And she said she had a lot of anger towards him. My husband has a lot of spiciness, some anger. It's easy to come out. And other things that I see is when he is stressed, he actually gets a little bit jaundiced, and your liver is presiding over anger. Your liver is also processing and eliminating bilirubin, which is the dead blood, red blood cells that would contribute to you having a yellowish tint. So I can usually tell when his body's under stress because of that. And, maybe there's other factors, but I really think that was sort of embedded and blueprinted, whether that's from the down regulation of his organ, his mom's liver at the time that kind of passed on to him or not. And so with your example, if we look at the kidneys and the bladder are kind of paired in traditional Chinese medicine, and there is a few emotions, not all of them always resonate with each, but fear, horror, conflict, feeling unsupported, feeling like terror, really those things, or feeling like you're blaming or being blamed, it can be emotions around that. So if you had experienced, say, fear or dread or horror or any of those things,
Check.
that would downregulate your kidney and your bladder function, and you are the blueprint for her. So if she inherited emotional trauma from the energetic aspect of that, it can downregulate that organ system in her. And this is another reason why I'm so passionate about the work I do. Yes, I don't want you to be sick and I want you to experience it, but I'm seeing the trajectory of children's health and health care and everything. And this is the most grassroots way I can help, is teaching you how to optimize your body as the blueprint for the next human that you're bringing into the world.
I love that, actually. You're going to change the world by this, actually. We need more people teaching the grassroots of things and the reasons why of things, and getting down to the fundamentals of things, rather than this Band-Aid quick fix things that we got going on in our current system, even with the vaccine and stuff like that, that was, we're going to get sick, so here's a vaccine. But really, I don't know. I'll tell you a story. I used to be a farmer's market, and so I would come across honestly thousands of people in a week, and in contact and, money exchanges and things like that. And when I first started, I used to get frustrated with money, oh, it's dirty. And I would use that hand sanitizer. So we're talking, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would use lots of hand sanitizer, and I found that I was getting sick a lot. And then I watched one of my fellow vendors, they dropped something on the floor, they picked it up and they ate it. And I was like, huh. And yeah, they were never sick. I noticed that they were just never sick. And so I was like, that's interesting. And so, not in a gross way, you still should wash your hands, but I just threw out the hand sanitizer and just went about my life normal. And yeah, I don't get sick anymore because I feel like I built my immune system. And so I think there's a thing with too clean and just, let's go back to our roots of what we put into our body with our food and, just
Yeah.
how we build our immune systems. Yeah. And then with pregnancy, like, yeah, if your immune system is really low to start with, pregnancy is a bit hard on the body, right? And so you're almost, are you fighting off a baby? I don't know. Is that a thing or is that not a thing?
Like with your immune system, yes, depending on how your body responds and the tissues and things like that, like it's immune modulating in that it can turn up certain aspects of your immune system. But like you said, of like your immune system, you are, again, if not the blueprint of building this, you are also passing your microbiome down. So when you're sanitizing and sterilizing your microbiome all the time, you don't have diversity of that, right? And now we're seeing this push towards C-sections, and there's hospitals that have that 50% of pregnancies are ending in C-section, which is a whole nother gamut we could get down.
I did 3 sections. I would choose, if I could go back, I'd do things totally different now as a mama, but keep going. It's very interrupted.
So you don't pass along your vaginal microbiome, right? Like that your body is meant to birth through the birth canal so that all of the bacteria that exists in that microbiome coats that baby and gives it cells to sort of fight off. I always like to make the analogy of like a bank robbery, right? So imagine there's like, you got this bank, it's like gold, it's filled with gold, and people always want to take it. They always want to be taking the money and taking the resources. And does it serve, say there's like 20 robbers and you got 10 security guards. Does it serve to drop a bomb that kills 10 on each side, right? And then you're outnumbered? Or does it serve to think about how do I get more security? Like, how do I put more security on that bank, right? So that they're outnumbering and it's an easy fight every single time. And sanitizing and sterilizing and eliminating the way we've really thought that medicine is helpful in doing is not the answer. And so we're seeing just this void of microbiome replenishment or development in babies when they're not birthed vaginally, they're not breastfed, they're not allowed to crawl in the dirt and pick up dirt and put their hands in their mouth and do things, right? So there's so much there that, yeah, we just really want to facilitate.
I can bring that back to actually my former greenhouse. Aphids were my worst enemy in the pepper plants or in my greenhouse. So to combat them, aphids are born pregnant. And so if you have one aphid, you have 10 billion. And so to combat that, and I grew without pesticide unless certified organic product was used. So to combat that, I didn't spray. I didn't do anything like that. I bought in thousands of dollars every year worth of good bugs to eat the bad bugs. And it was just a numbers game. You just got ahead of the bugs. So you'd bring in good bugs ahead of the time. And then they would eat the bad bugs. And then eventually, yeah, you won the war because you wouldn't have aphids. The point is that's such a natural process of, war. And that's in nature. That's using bugs to grow our food. And so it's the same things with our bodies. If we're using, whatever we're doing to our body is going to affect it in a positive or negative way. And so we're always, I guess, fighting a war with our bodies in, how we're
and
what we're doing to it.
I would say like we could even take down the label of like a war and just say like a balancing act, right? Because like we have really been taught in medicine to like kill, eliminate, terminate, like do all the things. And we're like, no, we actually have to create a balance. Like it's not about like, you can't just in isolation kill something. And even, I do think a good cleanse is a good thing, but like if you're just going to go on a big parasite cleanse too, like what job are they serving? Why are they in excess numbers? What are they doing? Are they cleaning up heavy metals and viruses that you're not clearing out of your body and they're actually somehow helping you? So we've got to get curious on all these levels, whether it's our food or our bodies, of like, okay, this is imbalanced and what's contributing to that imbalance and how can I correct it? And then what are all the natural, like when you talked about that, it just got like the visual of like the biggest little farm. And I loved that little movie on Netflix because it did really show of like, there's always going to be a problem, but there's always sort of another solution. And, I was the same. When COVID hit, I was really passionate about like securing food, right? And so I actually love this. I started my first digital product I ever made in my online business was like how to grow your own garden, little ebook course. It wasn't an ebook. It was a little video course that I made. And like part of it was like, how can you use your vegetable scraps from the grocery store if you're really scarce? And, in my garden, I was learning to do it. And I had those worms or whatever they are that ate like all the kale I was growing. Didn't want to spray chemicals. I tried putting garlic in the soil and I tried doing different things and they didn't really help. But I'd come out and I'd be like, you ate half of my crop already.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started getting smart. I had ducks. I just brought my ducks over there and let them go to town and they eliminated it and I didn't have to use chemicals and they probably pooped and fertilized the soil and it was great. So it's really about, we need to just reshift our focus, like balance, harmony. Those types of things are what we're aiming for. We're not aiming for like destruction and elimination of everything that's bad, because even though it's bad when it's in excess, it's doing something because, there's a process happening there. Like, even though nobody wants to be filled with parasites, they are eating heavy metals and viruses and yeast and things like that. So, we have to create balance in those systems and then the rest goes away, if that makes sense.
Oh. Yeah, I like that. And just focusing on the positives, right? Like positive versus negative. Yeah, the caterpillars are really bad, but the positive in it, and trying to figure out how to. So you fed your ducks some protein. Like, that sounds great. They left the kale alone and only ate the bugs.
Yeah, I would call them, I don't know if ducks are all like this. I had most around 40, 50 of them. But I drove home and they ran up to my car and they were all wiggling their butts. And I walked around the yard and they followed me. There's points I had sheep, goats, and ducks. I would walk the dogs through our 17 acres of trails and they would all follow. So I would be in the woods with 3 dogs, 2 goats, a sheep, and 40 ducks following me in a line.
I love it.
So they just really became, they would just walk up to them, call them over and get them over there. And I just, here's one for you and one for you and one for you. And let them sort of, the only thing that really was destructive was goats. They will maim everything under 4 feet.
They're smart. They're super. Yeah. And they're going to get out and yeah. If you have animals, good luck with that.
I free ranged everything, which, learn from experience, goats are not the ones to free range because they're in your car. They're in your kid's car seat. You can't get them out. They're on top of your shed.
Moving here to the smaller property, I've got just a few chickens and they get out all the time. And yeah, they're eating my garden and things like that. Yeah. I love it. And then when you were talking about that too, I was thinking, you have your ducks, you have your goats, you have your sheep. I miss my sheep so much. I love ladder scout. That was so much fun. And so and their food, they're great food. And so you would walk through your property and they would follow you. And what does that do? I mean, just the thought of that sounds so peaceful and natural. And what does that do to you when you're pregnant?
Yeah, I just think there's different animals, and this is probably a toxic trait of mine because I feel like it goes in reverse, although I haven't found enough evidence of it. But I think that animals can really sense our energy, right? And they have their own frequencies and their own, everything is a resonant frequency. Equine therapy happens in a way that the horse knows what's kind of going on with you, even if you don't, and offers support and an energy transfer, right? There's people doing massage therapy by Zoom. So, and people are paying for it. It's working. When we are intentional, we do not realize this is a thing I really like to explain. And it doesn't explain it telepathically, but there are people who get diagnosed with cancer and they get told they have 3 months to live, and 3 months and 2 weeks goes by and they die. They do an autopsy and they never had cancer. And you're like, well, how did this person die? This happens all the time. And it's because you told yourself every single day you were dying. You put an expiration on it. You instructed your cells. You sent chemical messages every single day. And so if you can do that to the point of your demise, why can't you do that to the point of your healing? And what are you doing if not just thinking about it and creating energy around that, right? That's why it's powerful to watch what we're consuming on the news and different things. But animals can sort of sense that in a way too, and they can offer frequencies, energies, things that can heal us. I've been so fascinated by this and I want to. I've been living in Mexico right now, and actually not so nicely, we have a dolphin exhibit in the middle of town, and it's part of the ocean. It's a channel. It kind of make a horseshoe shape. People can go and swim with the dolphins. And if I get pregnant and I'm going into labor, I might be the crazy lunatic you hear on the news that jumps in there, because there's such thing called dolphin-assisted birth. And dolphins have this sense of knowing that you're pregnant and you're in labor, and they will emit sound frequencies through their noise, whatever the noise is.
Yeah.
And it creates this echo, sonar echo thing. They also swim around you and create a vortex that pulls the baby out. And so interestingly, you can kind of find this information, although it's been scrubbed from the internet. There were facilities that did dolphin-assisted births. The babies that came out from that were found to be exponentially higher IQ. and the labor was like minutes long, or the delivery was minutes long and no pain. And like people wanted this. They were like, there might still be a facility or two in Hawaii, but dolphins were just so innately intelligent to know that you were in labor and exactly what to do to facilitate the delivery of that baby in the most easeful and like maximum, I don't know, health promoting environment. And so there's got to be some exchange there. And so if you do hear of the news of like some wacko, it's because I've either convinced them or it was me that jumped into the dolphin exhibit.
So my dad actually had an autoimmune disease. He had lupus. When he was diagnosed with lupus, the doctor who told him said, you have lupus and most people die within 10 years. And my dad got angry and stood and he to that doctor in the shoulder and said, there's only one person going to tell me when I'm going to die, and that's not you. And he walked out, and yeah, he went into remission over the years. And on the 10-year anniversary, he phoned that doctor and said, hey, I'm still kicking. Like, my dad did not let his lupus stop him. He had a few issues over the years, for sure, because that's just the way it is. But he didn't stop. He built a greenhouse. He built a business. He ran a farm. Like my dad just was a go-getter and didn't stop and just didn't let it affect his life. And so, and then ultimately he died of a heart attack, which may or may not have correlation, but still, like, he made it over 20 years when he should have, quote unquote, made it 10. So that's my little autoimmune story and mentality. Like, you're not telling me this.
Yeah. And I think if we knew the power that we had over that, right, what we would be able to do with that, it's information that's intentionally suppressed. You know, if people are looking into more into frequencies, like bioresonance testing is like a form of testing that I recommend if you have health things and you just can't get answers. Rife technology is something that has been suppressed by the FBI, and like, you know, healing cancer through frequencies. So there are so many examples of it if you go looking. It's meant to be quackery for the people who make money off of this instead.
Yeah, well, and again, back to the whole like medicine thing. Human beings have been around for thousands of years, right? So we've learned and we've done things and we've, you know, got knowledge. And some people would say that's the medical system, but the medical system puts band-aids on things and doesn't get to the root causes of things. Whereas our former medical system that's more natural, they were looking into the reasons why. They would know the natural things to give, to combat, or we can't dismiss things like that. So this is one thing, when someone tells me that they've had a baby, we're going to have a baby, I always give them this advice. I give them two pieces of advice because I've been a mama myself. I've always said, take a piece of information from a book or from grandma or great grandma or your mom, take it all in, and you know your baby best and you know what's going to work best for your baby, and do that. And even if it's a bit out there, like if it's 2 a.m. and your baby's crying and crying and crying, like, you know, something might come up from all the advice if it's in there. And then the second piece of advice is I always said, use a plug, which is a soother, because it'll shut them up.
Something interesting that I do with my clients is I teach them how to muscle test. And muscle testing is a way to communicate with your subconscious. So our body has a log of everything that's ever happened. We know if something's good for us or not good for us. And Aboriginal cultures would have used this form in the form of dowsing. So they would have went over a plant and they would have asked, you know, is this plant safe to eat? And they would have been able to get a yes, no based on the energetic frequency and the harmony between that plant and their body. We can test with this now. It's called bioresonance testing, but, you know, we can also test using a pendulum. So you can still dowse. A lot of homeopaths do that, you know. They'll ask, is this remedy going to be helpful for me? And like, it's a yes or no. But I teach you how to do muscle testing with that. And so I'm now the lunatic that uses this for everything. Don't know what I was doing yesterday. I was just standing in the kitchen. Something like probably like, is this 3-day-old chicken still safe to eat? And I get a yes, no, you know. Should I go grocery shopping today? Or like, dumb things that I'm just like, is this for me today? Right? And the point being is that we can use that for foods or medicines. And it's like you said, of like taking it all in. I also think, you know, I was listening to Gabor Mate talk, and he was talking about how we segregate Aboriginal cultures. And part of it probably because we wanted to take their land and do all the things. But also what I really got in there is like, we are isolating and diminishing their wisdom. And they have so much wisdom to give in natural remedies, herbal remedies, farming practices, life, healing, whatever, right? And so that would have been passed down and passed down and passed down. And even in, it's even in Western societies, it's still, the knowledge and the wisdom that grandparents, great grandparents, like we're all segregated in our own little lives and our own little boxes now, that we're not in community. We're not learning those things, and we're not inheriting that wisdom, and it's being lost. And it was really intentionally also lost in the 1930s, but maybe 1910, when the flexor, exactly what you were kind of talking about, like we practiced this version of medicine. We used homeopaths and herbal medicine and traditional Chinese medicine and using nature as part of this, until the Flexner report came out and said, basically, there's this new version of medicine. It's going to be great. It's pharmaceutical based. It's cutting edge technology. You want to be one of these new doctors, you must train here, and we'll actually give you free medical school. Only catch is you have to drop all your natural remedies in order to be this. But this is going to be the way of the future, so just do it, right? And so we're seeing that we've had 100 years of push out of that system. And look how much, I mean, I'm 35. I don't know how old you are, but we've seen the decline in our short. So over 110, 120 years, what has that really done to our healthcare system? And it's all integrated, like every part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you keep bringing up the word, and this word keeps coming up with me over and over in all the podcasts and everything in day-to-day life. What I feel like we're missing out on right now is community, because a phone is not community. It's not a real connection. And when you have a meal with someone, you're creating community. When you cook the food and real whole food and you put it on a table and you sit around a table and you have conversation and that's community. And that's what we need more of. I was at Kaylor Betts, retreat in Kelowna, and there was a zucchini. We were walking down the street and there was a zucchini sitting on an electrical box. And I thought that is what we need more of. We need more people growing food so that they have extra, so that they can put it on an electrical box. And when we came back through, sure enough, that zucchini was gone. Somebody took it. And so that's where it's at for me. That's why I'm coaching the way I'm coaching, is I want to teach people to cook how grandma did, how to grow their food how grandma did, how to raise their chickens and cows and sheep and all the things like grandma did, so that they can pass that along to their children. And bringing it back to what you were saying about energy and the pendulum, for myself, I pray, God, should I do this or should I do that? God, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And that's what I'm doing. And, the Lord is speaking through that with me. And so, yeah, it's just rounded. It's not just one thing. It's not just medical. It's not just food. It's not just, spiritual. It's not just community. It's all of it put together in a package.
You would laugh, because I have all these thoughts and all these ideas, right? And I was working in clinical practice in physiotherapy, and someone would come into my room, and it was like COVID time. So we're closing the doors and we're one-way process, and we're doing all the things in this clinic that somebody else ran. And so I get someone in the door and they're like, oh, and what's happening with this? And what's happening? And all of these things come vomiting out. I'm like, you know what I really think? I think the one thing, if I could change one thing, it would be small-scale communities, because that would eliminate, pollution and different things, like, again, not climate change in the way we've been sold, but environmental damage that we're doing. That would bring people together. That would be more purposeful. We would exchange services. We would barter services, which would mean we wouldn't have to be at working all the time at jobs we hate for people we hate and commuting. We would just be right here, and then we could grow our food, and I could trade with you and this, and I would just go off on a tangent, and they'd be like, so you think my shoulder's going to be... but it is so true. It's so true. Yeah. And you know what? A handful of them just really were like, I'm in. Like, let's do some things together. Let's talk about this. And it ended up becoming that I would have these patients, and I'd, close the door, and they'd be like, tell me all of it, like whatever, right? Or there would be some of the weird one, like not the weird, the ones who didn't like my weird. And they would be like, so I have this thing. Sounds really weird, but my leg feels better if I do this. And I'm like, it's not weird. If you told me putting purple paint on your leg made you feel better, it does. And here's why. Here's the thought process and how that affects and they would be like, okay. So yeah, just a mixed bag of where people are at in their journey. But I was laughing when you said community, because I was instantly brought to how I'd like close the door and just like vomit these ideas on people, and they'd be like, great.
I don't care if you believed in it, didn't believe in it, doesn't matter. And so I owned a store during COVID, and what we did is most of my staff believed as I did, it's the flu, like, let's just carry on with life. But what we told our staff was, if someone walks in with a mask on, you put your mask up because we want to respect them. They're already fearful enough. They want to do the rules. You just do it for them. You're doing it for them, not for the government, but for them. And then if someone walked in, because many of my customers, they thought the same thing we did, and they no mask, and we would pull our masks off and we would do our thing and hug each other and carry on with life, right? And yeah, like I just meet people where they're at, and that's what helps them. When I would go into a grocery store unmasked, I would see someone with a mask on, and I would stand 6 feet back, and I would say, "Are you comfortable if I walk past?" I didn't get into their bubble. I didn't want to stress them out. I was a kind anti-masker, not a mean anti-masker, and that's part of the community too. Is you do you, but I'll do you. I'm not going to force my whatever on you, and you can't force your whatever on me. Like, let's just be kind and walk through the grocery store together, and I'll keep my 6 feet so you don't get sick, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, absolutely. And I have people that like is really echoed in like my morning sickness work too, right? Like I'll have people who are like, that's not possible. What you're doing is not possible. It's crazy talk and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's totally fine. Like, you know what I mean? I understand you're coming from a place of survival mode or fear, and your risk to benefit analysis is that the medication is helping. Great. My risk to benefit analysis is that that's masking the problem. And when I don't address it, that's causing implications on the health of my unborn child. So the people who are here for me. And if you're not, that's fine too. We're going to all have our little clubs or cliques, our communities, and I wish you well. I'm not going to demonize you for your choices. I care that you have the opportunity to make a choice and that you are informed along the way. So a lot of my content that I make will educate. And yeah, beyond that, like there's no need to shame. It's just like, I'm here for if this version feels true for you. I really like to say this to my clients, and I got it from an energy worker. And it's like, this feels true for me, right? And like that is like, when I'm describing if your liver's not functioning well, what does that look like? And I'm like, if this feels true for you, you might want to try A, B, C, and D, right? So we're all just sort of like, living out what feels true to us. And we got to acknowledge that that's different based on other people's experiences.
Well, and real freedom is like I like freedom. I like doing things my way. And yeah, like real freedom is when you're really for freedom, you want it done your way for yourself and your family and your people and things like that. But then you also in return have respect for someone else for doing it their way. So bring it back to your practice. If a client comes to you and they would rather use the medicine, they have the freedom to do that. They don't have to do it your way. They can do it their way. And that's what real freedom is the kindness and respect to go, hey, we don't agree, but we can still be kind and love each other.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think we've lost that when we lost community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show today. So if any of our listeners find this and want to find you to get help with morning sickness, and, I would have loved to have found you however many years ago, 18, 15, and 13 years ago, I had babies. But if they want to find you, how can they find you, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so the place I am hanging out most often is Instagram, _wellness_element. I have the Wellness Element podcast on Spotify, and everything is really kind of central around Instagram. So you can find my website, you can find booking links, you can find course info, ebooks that I've made on deficiencies and different things. So everything's really there. I'm active in my DMs, and you get me when you chat. So if that feels true for you, then find me over there.
I love it. I love it. And thanks so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate your time, and really valuable information here and great conversation. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.